Hi, everyone. We've got some folks funneling in, so we're going to give it a couple of seconds before we do introductions. But thank you so much for joining us this evening. Wow, people are really piling in. This is awesome. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're so excited to have you listen to what Haley Moss has to share about her journey. Okay, I think we're ready to get started. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our second Access You webinar. We're so excited to be celebrating Autism Acceptance Month, and we're pleased to have Haley Moss join us to discuss her journey as a neurodiverse self-advocate. Before we dive in, I want to go over a few of the technical aspects of this event format. The webinar is being recorded, and that recording is going to be added to our YouTube channel following the event. So if you have to leave early, you can catch that at a later date. Please note that our captioning and interpreting services are going to be available throughout the presentation. Our ASL interpreter is going to be on screen the whole time. You can spotlight him if you'd like to. And to utilize closed captioning, please select the CC button at the bottom ribbon of your Zoom screen. We are going to be actively monitoring the Q&A function in the chat box, so don't hesitate to ask your questions if they arise. Haley's more than happy to answer questions. If you see a question that's submitted by somebody else that you'd like Haley to answer, you can give it an upvote, and we're going to try to prioritize that at the Q&A portion of the presentation. Once I give some brief introductions, Haley's going to present for about 50 minutes, and then we're going to use the last 10 minutes of our event to answer that live Q&A. Now that logistics are out of the way, let me introduce myself. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Katie Fields. I am the College Outreach Coordinator at Starkloff Disability Institute. I'm a person with invisible disabilities, and I use she, her pronouns. And as a visual description, I am a white woman with long brown hair, olive skin, dark glasses on my face, and I'm in a white room with a blue and red t-shirt. I coordinate Access You, and that's a free career development program for college students with disabilities. And in the program, students receive individualized career support through one-on-one meetings, workshops, and events. Students really gain the skills that they need to become competitive internship seekers. And we really focus on, in our program, disability-specific career needs for our students, like when and how to disclose a disability to an employer, how to identify workplace accommodations, determining which employers are most inclusive, and so on. Students who engage in our curriculum can take advantage of the many opportunities offered by our corporate partners. So if you're interested in learning more about Access You as a free resource, I invite you to email me at kfields@starkloff.org, which I'll throw in the chat. Now, I am thrilled to introduce you to our speaker this evening, Haley Moss. Haley, thank you so much for being with us tonight. We're so excited to hear what you have to say. Before we dive in, I want to read your bio, because you're just such an impressive person. Haley Moss made international headlines for becoming the first documented openly autistic attorney admitted to the Florida bar. She received her Juris Doctor from the University of Miami School of Law in 2018, and she graduated from the University of Florida in 2015 with a BS in psychology and a BA in criminology and law. Haley is the author of Great Minds Think Differently: Neurodiversity for Lawyers and Other Professionals, to be released in the summer of 2021 by the American Bar Association. And in November of this year, her next book, The Young Autistic Adults Independence Survival Guide, will be released. She's also the author of Middle School, The Stuff Nobody Tells You About, and A Freshman Survival Guide for College Students with Autism Spectrum Disorders. Haley's work on neurodiversity, autism, and disability has also been published in national media outlets. Haley, your bio is spectacular. You are such an impressive individual. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
Thank you for having me. It's been such a pleasure getting to work with everyone, and I'm really looking forward to getting to know all of our attendees and getting to work with you and be a part of Access U. So in
Thank
the chat today, I actually just asked everyone if they feel comfortable or they would like to share anything with me about where they're from and what brings them here. That would be really cool. So before I get started, I also wanted to give a description of myself as well. So I am Haley Moss. I also use she, her pronouns, and a visual description is I am a white woman, though I think sometimes my face is kind of red and I blush a lot. I have long red hair. I have bangs in front of my face, and I am wearing a floral multicolored top. It is pink and dark blue. I am sitting in my kitchen table right in front of my kitchen so you can see some of my wood cabinets behind me. And I also have a little sign in what is to my right, but it's probably the left side of the screen that says, "Today I will be as happy as a bird with a French fry." It is probably my favorite thing in my kitchen, and it makes me smile every single day. And I hope sharing that little tidbit with you on this evening makes you smile as well, because I love French fries. They're my favorite food on the planet.
Well, it made my night. Haley, the metaphorical webinar stage is yours, so I'm going to leave you to it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I'm going to share my screen so then you all could follow along with some slides. And something else with housekeeping is I know that we are in a webinar format. So if you want to hide yourself, if you need to step away, if you need to do anything to make this more accessible to you, go for it. I am not one to judge. If you need to take a drink, if you need to check in with what would make today accessible for you, I give you the space to do so, because no one person has the ability to grant or gatekeep access. Access is something that we create together, and I hope that the next hour, so that we're all together, or however long we are, because I have no sense of time right now, is that we are all together and that we are able to feel comfortable and invited in this space. So without further ado, let's get this show on the road of our perspectives and excitement for Autism Acceptance Month. So every time we have somebody who talks about disability, I always am curious about what their connection is and why they're the person who should be talking to me about it. And I'm sure that might have been a question that you have, although I think Katie did a pretty good job explaining and introducing who I am. But just a quick refresher, especially for those of you who want something a little bit more visual. And there's also a picture of me in a yellow floral dress on here holding a sign that says #inclusion. So that's stuff that I'm super, super passionate about. And I was diagnosed with autism when I was 3 years old. So I was one of those difficult nonverbal kids originally. I became Florida's first openly autistic attorney, which is one of those titles I feel kind of funky about, mostly because there are tons of autistic attorneys out there and professionals, and our success shouldn't be predicated on one story. And also, it's just being open is such a privilege as well. And I realize a lot of people don't disclose for whatever the reason, and we're going to talk a little bit about disclosure later too. So in my previous life, I was a litigator who worked in healthcare and international law. I left that to get to do all sorts of fun stuff regarding disability inclusion and neurodiversity, and also making sure that the legal profession is more accessible and inclusive, especially to lawyers with disabilities. I taught my first college class last semester at Taylor University. I taught a bunch of psychology students about autism and neurodiversity, and I hope to keep doing that going forward too. I also serve lawyers at the statewide level here in Florida. I am from the Miami area, so that's where I live right now. I've been in Florida my entire life. So I get to make sure that our lawyers are happy, healthy, and able to stay engaged as well. And as Katie mentioned, I have 2 books coming out this year, so it's been a really wild time in quarantine of writing. And now I finally get to share what feels like my children with the world at the end of this. So I am an autistic person and self-advocate talking about autism. So I hope that I am the right person to be having this discussion today, because it's always, what is your connection to this? It's always weird when it's someone who isn't really in that nothing about us without us mentality. So a little bit about me when I was a little kid, because people always wonder, where did you come from? So when I was diagnosed as a little kid, so on screen is a picture of me in a pretty pink princess looking dress. I must have been about 3 years old here, which is about how old I was when I was first diagnosed as being on the spectrum. So my young little kid self was a non-speaker who was very much crying and screaming at everything. I also was someone who knew that the lights were on all the time because I was completing these really big jigsaw puzzles. I loved doing puzzles as a kid. And I also just couldn't seem to figure out how to make friends or be socially engaged or really interact with others. It just was something I struggled a lot with. And I actually still struggle with making friends, which is why I love being in front of a group of people because I feel like all of you are my friends, especially because I know that some of you are sharing where you're from or something about yourself. I feel like I know everybody in our webinar room to some extent. Even though a lot of you are new to me, I think that we will all be friends. So now that hopefully I made some friends since I was 3 at this point, I hope I did in the last 20 something years. I started in special education. I was mainstreamed in kindergarten. Most of my speech was repeating things that other people said. So I was basically a human parrot. In autism world, that is called echolalia. So I was one of those kids that just repeated back all the things. I always just was curious. I didn't know really how to say things for myself, even though saying things that other people said meant something to me. And once I got to kindergarten, I was in a mainstream classroom. I stayed there up until college. I was a happy kid. I did well in school for the most part. I was one of those kids who always had something going on. I didn't like to answer questions or participate too much because I felt too shy, but I always did very well. I was afraid of being Hermione Granger because I was obsessed with Harry Potter as a little kid. I was afraid to be the person constantly raising their hand. And a fun fact is Harry Potter is actually how I learned about autism. Is I was obsessed with the series as a 9-year-old, and my mom sits me down one day and tells me I have magical powers, and being 9 years old, I totally believe everything that she's saying. And she explains to me that how Harry is different. He doesn't quite fit in with the wizards, he doesn't quite fit in with the non-magic people, but he's still the hero of the story. And different was neither better nor worse. It's just different, and different could be extraordinary. So that was how I began with this acceptance framework as well. Oh, I love that there are people who are also obsessed with Harry Potter. It makes things feel very, very cool. I feel like I'm not alone. So I know we get to talk about college a little bit. I went to the University of Florida, and my biggest struggle was executive functioning. I'm pretty sure that is still the thing that is the absolute hardest for me as a real adult. So planning things and prioritizing things and staying on task, starting things, knowing when to stop, having all sorts of independent living stuff. So when I first got to college, I feel like I was kind of on my own with a lot of new things. I am an only child. I did not have a bunch of super close relatives who were similar ages to me, like cousins or anybody else. So I never was one of those kids who went on planes to visit their families growing up. I never went to sleepaway camp. I had rarely been to sleepovers at friends' houses or the like. So packing up my stuff and moving into a dorm room was an adventure. And the very first time I did laundry in college, I put all of my clothes into the dryer, wondered why they came out soapy and warm, and realized I put them in the dryer, not the washer, because to my surprise, the washer and dryer at the dorms didn't look like the ones we had at home, and that kind of ruined everything. I didn't realize that there were all of these different washers and dryers and that they don't look the same everywhere you go. And you could just imagine the absolute routine shock it was for my poor autistic self to realize that the washers can be below the dryers and not above the dryers. And I was just like, oh my God. And I also have a lot of difficulties as well with independent living skills. And I really began to learn this in college is I didn't really know how to do things that felt like most adults seem to just know, like knowing when to clean, when to do this, when to, and how to do things. Even right now, I'm trying to learn to be a better driver. So I know how to drive. I am just not very good at parking because I have no sense of spatial awareness in that regard. So I'm trying to get better at parking inside the lines. I promise I'm a good driver. I have a driver's license, contrary to popular belief. It's something that I spend a lot of time working on. I'm trying to learn how to cook. I'm trying to learn how to have certain adult skills and trying to be better at doing these things on my own. Although right now I do have a little bit of help. So my mom would always help me and she'd make food for me and put it in my freezer. Or whenever my parents would come to visit, they would help clean my apartment. So it's a miracle that laundry gets done though. And I know that for many college students, these are things that just seem difficult. And I know that most college students have this thing of, we just don't want to clean, or we just don't want to do this, and we procrastinate. The difference is for me is I want to do the thing. And it's just that thinking it through and going through all the steps makes me feel kind of overwhelmed, and I lose place, or I just feel like so overwhelmed by the idea. I'll be like, I want to clean today. And then I'll take out like the vacuum, the mop, the dusters, and the different like surface cleaners. So I'm at my kitchen table right now. My kitchen table is glass. So I'll take out like the glass cleaners and the granite cleaners for my countertop, and then all sorts of other stuff. And I'll be like, yeah, this is so much. I don't know where to start. And I'll just be like, nope, this is exhausting to think about. I think that's executive functioning in a nutshell for all of you. And that's stuff that I think a lot of us, especially as younger people and also people who do have neurodivergence and cognitive differences, struggle with. So other than that, I think college and law school were a lot of an adventure. I learned a lot about myself. I did fairly well in school. I did make it to law school. I went to the University of Miami actually on a full scholarship as part of a public interest program, which was really cool and a huge privilege and a huge blessing in my life too. I'm very proud of what I was able to accomplish in getting to school. It was just all the stuff outside of school that was always so difficult to figure out, and still kind of is. And I think that when we talk about these things, we have to make sure we're not holding people to this arbitrary timeline of you must be able to do this by this age. I am going to be 27 this year, and I'm still learning how to straighten my hair properly. So someone in the chat earlier mentioned that they like the way my hair looks, and I'm still trying to figure out how to get my hair to actually straighten properly. I am not the best at using different brushes or the straightener, and it's something that I've been trying to do since I was like 13. It does not by any chance determine whether or not you will be a successful adult, whether or not you can use all sorts of different styling tools or other weird self-care, hygiene related things. It's okay. We will get there on our own time. So I did become a lawyer. I love getting to tell stories about my time in law school and after law school. So I was actually our student commencement speaker that my classmates liked me enough to choose me to give the student address at our graduation. I thankfully did not have to take the bar exam more than once. I still have nightmares about it. I think I had one maybe 2 days ago. And we talked a little bit about this idea of Florida's first openly autistic attorney. And what I really wanted to highlight on this is, how do we tell stories about disability? And things when we tell stories about disabled and neurodivergent people that I want to really bring into focus is, who is telling these stories? Who is the audience of the story? And who is missing from the story? Is when other people would tell my story, the way that they told it was not a way that I wanted to tell my story. That other people would tell a story of, once she was nonverbal and now she's an attorney. Now she's a lawyer. She started here at this very tragic point and now she's a lawyer. And that was not the story of who I was. That was a story that made non-disabled, largely neurotypical audiences feel inspired. It made them feel good about themselves. And who was missing from the story? So I think a lot of people did talk to me for my story, so I wasn't missing from my own story. And I think a lot of that came from the privilege of being a lawyer, as somebody who has a graduate degree. But a lot of times, no matter what, people still want to talk to my parents about everything. Or people want to talk to my friends, or they want to talk to my professors and my teachers. And I think that's something we really need to think about when we tell these stories, is who is the story for, who is it about, and who is intended to listen. So something really cool that happened is I eventually took back the mic and started writing about my own story. So I got to tell those stories about being labeled as this for places like HuffPost. And it was really powerful being in charge of that. So when I did go to law school, I did have a job after law school that waited for me after graduation and passing the bar. I was a litigator, which meant I actually got to work on stuff that did go to court. So what I did in international law and in healthcare. So in international, I was part of an anti-terrorism practice, which meant that I got to represent people who were harmed by drug cartels. And in healthcare, I represented hospitals against insurance companies. The terrorism stuff was really cool. The hospital stuff sounds a little bit less interesting. I'm willing to admit that. And probably the coolest thing that happened when I did become a lawyer is that we started having a conversation about disability and neurodiversity in our profession like we'd never really had before. I went through law school not feeling that there was a disabled community in the profession whatsoever. I felt like I was an island in a way. And I look back 3 years out of school, and that doesn't seem to be the case anymore. So for anyone who is pre-law or thinking about going into this, there's all sorts of really cool stuff out there now that did not exist while I was a student. And that is such an exciting and hopeful thing for me to think about, is that there is so much more out there that just didn't exist, and it's only getting better, that we're slowly but surely inching towards this accessible, inclusive environment. And I hope to keep pushing that stuff forward. So whether I do end up back in practice or I end up still doing what I'm doing, getting to work with firms and getting to work with companies on being more neurodiversity friendly and actually caring about people who are different and have disabilities and who are neurodivergent, it's just an exciting time to be thinking about our futures, especially in light of everything going on in the world right now. So I want to shift gears just a little bit because talking about myself for an extended period of time can feel a little bit strange. It feels really strange when you talk about yourself a lot. So I want to talk about barriers to access and also just how we can keep moving forward, because this is not just my story. It is something that I want to do, is give everybody a lot of time to think about action and moving forward and what we can each do in understanding what different people experience. So I mentioned neurodivergent people and neurodiversity a little bit, and I want to give a quick definition of people who are neurodivergent or have different conditions or other ways of experiencing the world based on how their brain works and how they have cognitive differences. So neurodiversity is this concept where neurological differences are to be recognized and respected as any other human variation. Fact, we all have different brains. So people who might identify as neurodivergent or a part of neurodiversity as well are people who might have autism, ADHD, learning disabilities, Tourette syndrome, intellectual disabilities. And depending on how somebody may identify, I also like to include mental health disabilities in this definition. So I know some people with other mental health disabilities who do identify as neurodivergent and others who do not. And for those of you who might not have one of these types of labels or identities or diagnoses, you are probably neurotypical. And that is still part of neurodiversity because together we are a diverse group. And it's really beautiful that we all think differently, experience the world differently. We have different ways of experiencing things from a sensory perspective, from how we think things through to how we are creative. It's just really cool stuff. So instead of just seeing everybody's brains or other brains as inferior or broken or needing to be fixed, we need to understand that some people just work differently. And that's not a bad thing. Which brings us to this other idea of ableism, is the thing that I think makes it very hard to be a neurodivergent person. So a lot of us might be familiar with this, others might not be. So fear not if this is new to you. This is a judgment-free zone. And the easiest definition of ableism that I can give you is this really cute graphic with a little hot air balloon on it. That is, ableism is living in a world not equipped for me. I always say that it's living in a world that isn't always designed with me in mind. It's not thinking about how things might be difficult for me on a sensory standpoint. It might not be thinking about whether or not I want to be included in certain things. It might not be thinking about the way that my body and my brain will process the world or experience the world. But this much more concise and wordy definition from the Center for Disability Rights explains ableism as a set of beliefs or practices that devalue and discriminate against people with physical, intellectual, or psychiatric disabilities, and often rests on the assumption that disabled people need to be fixed in one form or another. It is intertwined in our culture due to many limiting beliefs about what disability does or does not mean, how non-disabled people learn to treat people with disabilities, and how we are often not included at the table for key decisions. I think that's a really nice summary of a lot of the things that are difficult especially for autistic people, is people think we need to be fixed to be neurotypical, that people don't know how to treat us. And I even think to earlier today, I actually spoke to a group of grad students, and one of the students was very nervously asking me questions. She was afraid that they might be harmful. She didn't know if I would feel comfortable. She didn't know how to ask questions about disability. She was going to be a speech language pathologist when she grew up, and she just didn't know how to explain or just answer or ask and wonder if it was okay. And it's really important that we understand that we don't always have this innate ability to recognize whether or not we're going to make someone feel uncomfortable or how to treat someone with a disability. What are we allowed to say? What are we not allowed to do? And of course, above all, we should be treating people with respect and dignity and not be devaluating or discriminating against people. It sounds a lot easier than it actually is. In fact, ableism is a huge barrier to access and inclusion. So some of these very nice ways to sum this up is it's prejudice, stereotyping, or treating people differently, often negatively because of disability, and especially autism. So something that happens is that ableism is both internal and external. So it's not always conscious. It could be something that's just so intertwined in our culture, including how we talk about people. Think about how for a very long time, people were okay using the R word. And the R word, of course, started as a way of describing people with intellectual disabilities that's actually very harmful. But it was something that just took on a life of its own of being an insult towards others. So that casual acceptance we had of that until the last decade or 2 decades was a form of ableism. And even today, we have different language that's harmful to people with mental health disabilities that just we casually use. And I think that's the next frontier. And for those of you who are wondering, the R word is no longer even used in the law. It actually was signed out of federal legislation in 2010. That is a very cool fun fact. And when we think about more external ableism, I want you to think about where we are. So events, where we go, and what may or may not be accessible, especially when we're thinking about autistic people in this case. So for today. So today, what's really cool is we have an amazing interpreter. We have closed captions. I happen to love closed captions at events because sometimes I need that in order to process things differently and to be able to understand everything that's going on. While sometimes if we don't have things like closed captions, or it might be inaccessible for people with hearing impairments or deaf people, it might be inaccessible for those who need that extra processing time or struggle with auditory cues. Sometimes me, or even people who are just a couple seconds behind and forgot something for a minute and maybe had to walk away or grab a drink of water, and then they see those extra few words scrolling on the screen and they feel like they didn't miss out on anything. So we can have all sorts of forms of being excluded or experiencing ableism. It could be very overt with people being bullies. It could be very subtle with people trying to make decisions on our behalf. So that's something that I've experienced a lot, especially as a young person, is that people would often make decisions about me without me. So they would choose not to invite me out with the group, thinking it might be inaccessible for my sensory needs without considering whether or not I would even want to go in the first place or make that decision. So that is what I consider benevolent ableism. And that is thinking that you're doing the right thing, often very well intentioned, but making decisions or doing things for a neurodivergent or disabled person when help is neither needed nor wanted. That's what happens every time somebody invites an entire group out to a restaurant and they don't invite me knowing I probably won't like the food. At least ask me if I want to go. It's not that hard. But people often are like, oh, we didn't invite you because we knew you wouldn't like it. Would I have not liked it? Probably, but please let me make that decision. So that also eventually will go to our ideas of self-advocacy that we'll discuss a little bit later in the evening as well. So something else that we talk about a lot, especially when it comes to jobs, and I know with internships and everything that Access U does as well, as we talk about disclosure. And I really love talking about disclosure, especially because it feeds into so many different things. It's a very personal decision. So I became very open about my autism in my teen years. I was outed by a teacher and never looked back. I think I would have rather disclosed on my own terms, but I think it was the right moment for me because I was writing my book, or at least my first book, and I was starting to get my feet wet in autism advocacy. So I went to my first conference at that age. Everything kind of came together at the right moment. But I also am like, why wouldn't someone disclose? Or maybe they're not ready to disclose, or maybe they're self-diagnosed and still trying to get it figured out or see how they feel about autism or neurodivergence or disability as a form of identity. And I asked around, especially amongst people with jobs and things like that, about why wouldn't they disclose? And in every situation, we had kind of a couple huge categories that showed up. Is a lot of people were afraid of being perceived as weak. They didn't want to be seen as less than, or just being needy, or seen as a burden. That they also were afraid of possibly having others think they're receiving special treatment. This was something that I struggled a lot with in the workplaces, because I would be asked, like, are you doing okay? Are you just things that my colleagues often would not. And even at one point, that my boss would take me out to lunch sometimes more often than the other people I worked with. And it was perceived as I was the favorite. And that wasn't something that I was ever trying to do. I just wanted the playing field to be level, receive the accommodations that we discussed throughout the process, things like that as well. There's also this idea of internalized ableism, which I put up a handy little graphic to explain, of this little dude looking thing, doodle guy, I guess he is. He's in a wheelchair. And he has some thought bubbles saying that he'll never get a job, he's not good enough, he's broken and needs to be fixed, and he's asking for too much. So all of these are ideas of negative self-talk, and when we start to believe things in stereotypes about our disabilities, that we genuinely believe it about ourselves. So for me, that meant going through law school thinking I was stupid and lazy because I wasn't able to complete the work or process it in the exact same way that my peers were. It's something that I'm still working through, because I've learned that no, in fact, I am not stupid and lazy. I am just autistic, and I just process things in a different way. And I needed a little bit more time to do that. So someone might not disclose because they haven't extended themselves that grace and time to accept everything about their identity. And that's okay too. This is all a journey. There's also pre-existing stereotypes of autism and related disabilities. I've been in situations where jobs and the like thought that I was a tech genius, because there's a lot of stereotypes of autism, just that we're all really good at science, technology, engineering, and math. I went to law school. I went to law school to avoid doing math, and I was still asked to do math things a lot. So those stereotypes can be really harmful. And I think sometimes where someone doesn't disclose, they might not be automatically associated with those different stereotypes. And of course, there is potential discrimination that somebody may face. All things to think about when disclosing, which brings me to some stuff about jobs. So I know that we love to talk about jobs. Jobs are really, really cool. And some people often want to know when the right time to disclose is. And it really depends on you as an individual. There is no perfect moment to say, guess what? I'm autistic. I have ADHD. I have blah, blah, blah. There's no right time to say that. So depending on who you are and how you feel, you might want to do that in a cover letter, an interview, when you have an offer, or when you need an accommodation. So there is no perfect hard and fast rule, unless we're invoking the Americans with Disabilities Act. So for those of us who want a little bit of legal without me sounding like a complete lawyer and speaking legalese, the ADA is divided into 5 titles. Title 1 is about employment. It covers businesses with 15 or more people or employees, and they are required to give you reasonable accommodations unless it either costs them too much money or it is basically impossible. That is called undue hardship. So under the ADA, you don't have to disclose until you need an accommodation. In that case, if you're going to start the accommodations process, you need to disclose so you can get the help and assistance that you need, so work is somewhere that is equitable and the playing field is leveled for you, and you're able to do what you were hired to do to the best of your ability. So we all talk about, how do we even have these conversations? Talking about disability, and especially autism, especially with jobs, can be really complicated. It can be messy. It can be ugly. It is a complicated thing because every situation that you disclose in is different. Whether you're talking to someone you're interviewing with, whether it's a supervisor, a colleague, a friend, a first date, however we do disclose in all these different scenarios is very different. Why we're disclosing in all of these scenarios is very different. But the cool thing about disclosure is it promotes self-advocacy, and we get to have all sorts of cool resources. So I really wanted to point out something for young people. So this is geared at young people, especially from the Office of Disability Employment Policy that is run by the US Department of Labor. And they have a very cool workbook that is linked on here and pictured the front page of it on the slide that talks about how to disclose and all sorts of different disclosure resources. So I want to do a little bit of disclosure resources so we can have a much more extended conversation about this going forward, or if you just want some takeaways. So some takeaways is there's some cool things from Virginia Commonwealth University. So their 3 steps to disclosing is determining the need, when, and how to disclose. And in this really cool resource that's linked on here as well, is that they have all sorts of great things about when you could disclose, what the pros and cons are, and also how to have those conversations, because it never feels easy. It's always going to feel kind of awkward to share something very vulnerable about yourself, but sometimes it is so that other people can be more supportive of you and accept you for everything that you are. And of course, the gold standard to me of when we're talking about jobs and we're talking about accommodations and interviewing and disclosure is the Job Accommodation Network. This is also funded by the ODEP, and I'm a huge fan. They have all sorts of cool stuff about interviewing, disclosure, accommodations that might be realistic for autistic people. And you can always visit everything that they do because they are like, they know everything about all disabilities there and accommodations. It's so incredible of a resource. You can find them at askjan.org. Now that our ad break is over, we are going to talk a little bit about masking. We're going to talk about how people don't act like themselves, or at least pretend to be neurotypical or do things to seemingly fit in, or might not have to admit that they're struggling. So we talk about this a lot with autism, is that how do people avoid being bullied, socially excluded? They want to be accepted. They want all of these types of feelings, or maybe they want to just be as neurotypical as humanly possible. So this idea of masking is taking on a persona that feels more neurotypical, while camouflaging is just hiding behavior that's viewed as socially unacceptable or performing neurotypical feeling behavior. So no matter how good these things are as coping skills, and in some cases they're survival skills, they prevent people from bullying, they prevent people from being harmed in dangerous situations. These things might help prevent violence in situations involving police, for instance, where you might not be seen as a threat, or you might not be seen as suspicious if you at least look neurotypical. There's all sorts of reasons why people mask, especially autistic people. And I really wanted to highlight this, and it makes it very hard that not everyone can be open. And when I talk about being openly autistic, it means that I'm not masking. It means that I have the privilege and confidence to be my full self, that if my hands want to move, they do. But I am very cognizant of the fact that sometimes I do masking and camouflaging because I want to be accepted. I want to be seen as deserving of humanity at times, because I think sometimes we have a way of treating autistic people differently, and it really does get frustrating. But in some situations, I realize it's survival strategy. So for a lot of folks, this might be worth considering and understanding. And it really seems to affect people across race, gender, and sexual orientation. So I've learned a lot from autistic people of color who have said that this is a survival strategy for them, especially in communities where they might not feel accepted, in encounters with law enforcement. And of course, we see it a lot by gender. So we see a lot of talk about masking and camouflaging being associated with autistic girls and women and those who were socialized as female, primarily because of how girls are socialized, especially growing up, and how women may act. So even just surviving the social landscape and cliques and school, that's something that I know I struggled a lot with. And when I would mask the highest was at school, because I didn't want to be bullied. I wanted to be accepted. I didn't want people to know I was socially struggling, even though I very clearly was. So I would be using these techniques to appear socially competent. I still do some of this stuff. If you still do it too, that's totally okay. These are kind of survival mechanisms at times. So you'd be plotting out conversations. So I especially do this whenever I have to call certain people on the phone that I have to think about what I'm going to be saying. And I have to kind of mentally go through, how is this person going to react? It's also using the right facial expressions or having the right body movements. Is that you're finding all these different ways as a chameleon, almost, it feels like, to prevent others from seeing that you're having social difficulties. And that's also why a lot of folks who are marginalized get autism diagnoses later in life, especially if they start out speaking as kids. So these types of masking camouflaging behaviors do stop people from receiving services, possibly getting accommodations, all sorts of different things. And the research also shows that girls do this by staying near peers and weaving in and out of activities and social groups. So this is something I did a lot, is I always looked like I had a lot of friends, even though I felt like I had no friends. So I'd always be able to sit with a different group. I realized this especially when I got to grad school and even when I was working, is I always had different people I was able to hang out with, but I never was close to anybody. I was always able to find the equivalent of a different lunch table to sit at. So it always looked like I had different groups, different friends, but I never had a table to call my own. So people never realized that I didn't really belong anywhere. It looked like I belonged everywhere when I belonged nowhere. So people didn't notice I was socially struggling. People would go, oh no, you're doing fine. You're conversing, you're sitting with different people. And I'd be hiding the fact that I was struggling, or I'd be at this table that wasn't my table and just silently nodding along, not really knowing how to engage, or I would just be dominating conversation, not knowing what else to do. And this is something that comes from a cool study that I found. I love the title of the study. It was called Putting on My Best Normal. And I don't even know what that means. There is no such thing as normal, so to speak. It's a setting on the dryer. And as I learned in the last couple of years, it's also a town in Illinois. I've been there. And what people seem to feel as these types of consequences and motivation for masking, camouflaging, and acting normal, whatever that means, is social acceptance and avoiding consequences like bullying, violence, whatever it might be, harassment, etc. And when we do this, though, we face exhaustion, burnout, and we feel that we're not being ourselves. It is a very difficult existence, having to weave between that neurotypical world at times and also getting to be our most wonderful autistic selves. And that's also why we need autism acceptance. It is acceptance month after all. And that brings us to, when we're trying to be accepted, we have to keep self-advocacy at the forefront. So self-advocacy is how we get over a lot of these barriers to inclusion that we have with masking, with non-disclosure, and with ableism. So self-advocacy is both skills and a movement that empowers people. It empowers disabled people to make choices affecting our lives and allows us to be independent. So I really like this idea of that self-advocacy is a personal and political philosophy that is a movement primarily for and by people with disabilities making their own decisions, speaking for themselves and others with disabilities, and taking control of their own lives. So self-advocacy, as in the graphic below, also means a lot of different things. It means speaking up for yourself, staying informed, knowing your rights, finding support, solving problems, self-determination, and probably most importantly, asking for help. Asking for help is really hard because you still want to be independent, and we are selling this lie that independence for autistic people means doing everything yourself. Sometimes self-advocacy and being independent means knowing how to ask for help, which is what we're doing when we disclose and request things like accommodations, especially in college and employment. So we get to see this as an interactive conversation that's always ongoing, that empowers everybody. That's what good self-advocacy does. And sometimes you don't even have to talk about autism or disability if you don't feel comfortable either. So something that I like to do when I am still testing the waters, especially in a work situation, is I'll just say, I work best when you give me clear instructions, and fill in the blanks there, or when you give me a hard deadline. Something like that tells me and tells you exactly what I need without me telling you about autism, what that means for you, what that means to me. It sometimes is a safe way to say, Please help me with this thing so I could do the best I can to help you help me. Something else that we need to do is decide who needs to know as self-advocates. Do we want our friends to know? Do we want our supervisors to know? Do we also want our colleagues to know? On the flip side of this, if somebody discloses to you, find out who else knows or who else it is okay to tell. Think about of that you don't want to accidentally out somebody if the autistic person or disabled person isn't necessarily ready to have that conversation with everyone around them. So I always feel very awkward when other people try to explain my autism for me. To other people, I will tell you and talk about it myself. Everybody might know, but not everyone might have the same level of knowledge. I think it's really important that as allies that you keep in mind who knows, because not everyone is ready to know, or not everyone is ready to disclose to everybody. It might be a very touchy personal thing, or it might be a source of pride. Every single person is different. And no matter what their experience is, that's super important and valid to keep in mind. And of course, that there are those pros and cons to disclosure for everyone. And we can also advocate for solutions and policies going forward. So one of the coolest things that I saw in one of the first places that I worked is they had a fragrance-free policy. And me being a young, fresh-faced intern had no clue why that was there. And I found out that was a result of advocacy from a past intern who had a disability, because she was sensitive with allergies and headaches and different things like that. So they had a policy for no colognes and perfumes because of sensory differences, allergies, and other health conditions. And I thought that was just so cool that self-advocacy made that happen, that all new hires had to be aware and compliant with this to make sure that where we worked was accessible and welcoming to everybody around us. Which brings us to how we can be inclusive of neurodiversity, that we can be doing things actionable every day that help us help everyone around us too. So we can be open from the top down. So when you see people in power that are open about disability or open about any marginalization or hardship, it inspires other people to be open. I taught a college class last semester, and the fact that I was an openly autistic professor for them, that I had neurodivergent students who felt comfortable opening up to me, that they were willing to tell me things they had never told other members of the faculty. They were willing to share if they were neurodivergent themselves, even if they were not receiving accommodations in my class. It was very important for them to have that visibility. And it shouldn't just fall on the interns or new hires or the young people to be leading by being open and vulnerable. It should be something that starts at the top. The burden should not be on autistic people to do all the work all the time. It gets exhausting. We can also align people to their strengths, which is also a nice way of saying, please don't put me on all the math things forever. We can have meaningful communication with each other. So that means asking questions that are respectful. That means trying to do a better job being clear. It means however we can be accepting, however we can be inclusive, that we do that. And sometimes it's having that interactive process of communication and for accommodation, being better friends, being better mentors, better allies, whatever situation we're in, we can always do better at meaningfully communicating with other people. Sometimes that means having hard conversations, and we can do that. We can also have universal design. So that's this idea that we design spaces and products and environments that are accessible to as many people as possible, regardless of age or disability or background. So think about how we have elevators that sometimes beep, and they have braille buttons, and they light up, and they do all of these different things to account for the fact that everyone has a different experience, and then every single person knows exactly what floor they're on. Finally, we need to have neurodiverse mentorship and leadership. So this is on college campuses, this is in workplaces, this is in our communities. So something that's really difficult, I think, at least for me and for a lot of us, is finding good mentors. Everyone always thinks that I have it together by myself, but I would love good mentorship. It's something that I don't feel like I've ever gotten enough of from other neurodivergent people or people that are in positions of power. So this is especially true when we're talking about jobs. So if you give somebody a job or an internship, that's the beginning. That is not the end. You are not the savior for doing that. You want to help someone advance. You want to mentor them. You want them to be a part of things. And we also get to help people, or have these neurodivergent people help with recruiting, planning, and training. So again, we talked in the beginning about why I wanted to be here and why this is important that we have a nothing about us without us approach when we talk about autism, especially during acceptance month, is even when we do these trainings and events, it's really important to me that there are autistic-led conversations, and it's such an honor to get to do that. And I hope that going forward as well, this is one of many of those conversations, and it just makes me really excited about the future, because I know that something that not everyone is aware of is that neurodivergent people and autistic people are everywhere, even if they're not open about it, or they are unidentified or self-diagnosed, or may not share that with you. And it's just really cool to see that the future is indeed a neurodiverse place. It's just up to us, all of us, to be more accepting and understanding and to take action every single day. And I think that we all have the power to do that. I believe that we have our couple minutes or so that we have reserved for questions, conversation, and just learning from each other. I could tell that the chat has been very active, but I haven't been able to follow along the whole time because it would be too much for my executive functioning to both pay attention to them and paying attention to what I really wanted to share with everyone. And something else to keep in mind is a lot of this is also just my musings, my opinion as well. I do not speak on behalf of all autistic people. I am just one little autistic dot in a sea of a huge community, and I just do my best to amplify as many folks, as many perspectives, and hopefully bring a little bit of a bridge between the allies and our parents and our loved ones and our supporters and autistic people as well. So thank you for your time. I know it is an evening and it is a Wednesday, and I don't want to keep everyone all night long. And I'm really grateful for each of you for spending time with me. So thank you.
Haley, thank you so much for sharing your story with us and enlightening us on neurodiversity. I feel like you touched on so many things that are relevant, particularly to the college students we serve. You know, self-advocacy, disability in the workplace, ableism, the transition process. Fantastic job. Thank you so much. Let's get to a couple of the questions. We've had a lot of folks submit questions ahead of time, and I want to make sure that we ensure that those folks get their questions answered. One of them I think is pretty good. You mentioned telling stories of disability and neurodiversity, and you discussed the importance of who's telling the story and what's left out. You mentioned that your story was watered down and focused on what was inspirational rather than the things that you actually wanted it to focus on. One of our questions touched on that. The question is, how can speakers, authors, and bloggers tell their parenting stories, their experiences and insights, and not be ableist? Do you have any advice for this person?
The biggest form of advice that I have for you, especially as bloggers as well, especially if you're a parent, is get your child's consent and try to put yourself in their shoes. So when I say that, I mean, how would you feel if your parent or caregiver or trusted adult wrote those things about you when you were your child's age? So I think about how, as a 13-year-old, for instance, I might not have wanted my mom to be blogging about my period, for instance. That's the best example I could think of off the top of my head. Does that mean it's okay for you to do that if your child is autistic or has a disability? That's completely probably not the case. I know that a lot of parents will share that in the name of awareness or helping others, but you might not have been doing that had your child not had a disability. So try to put yourself in their shoes. And of course, if you are really affirming or your child is able to communicate with you, ask for consent first and foremost. I'm a huge fan of asking people how to tell their stories and how they feel comfortable being discussed, because I even do that with my mom. Okay. Like, I do post a lot on social media. I will ask my parents if it's okay if I could post a picture of them, because my mom is not a social media person and I want to be respectful of her privacy and her humanity as well, because I shouldn't be making those decisions without her.
Great answer, Haley. Thank you. We got another question. I'm also autistic and have a degree in an uncommon field for us, journalism. How do you handle the massive social demands?
Ooh, so I actually have a couple cool people you should probably meet. So I know a lot of autistic journalists, it's actually partly why I think law is such an interesting field, because we're kind of similar to journalists in the fact we're allowed to pester people with questions, and especially people who are considered powerful. And sometimes when we ask that one too many questions that might be socially inappropriate, you get a really great answer. So I'm so glad that you chose journalism first and foremost. And I think the social aspect of it is something that we have to adapt and work through. I think that I wish that I think in the future as well, especially in light of the pandemic, can be more accessible in terms of how we conduct interviews and think and communicate with others. So we might have communications over Zoom, over email, over some other platform, rather than just that scary pick up the phone moment. Just kind of a musing on journalism, because I think journalism is just very cool.
We've got somebody that says, what concerns me so much about my son is that he's not happy with himself and is so frustrated with himself for not being able to get friends. How do you deal with that? And do you struggle with this also? We think he's awesome and tell him so, but he's not happy.
I struggle a lot with making friends. I still think it's really hard, which is why I love all of you for being here, because I feel like I don't know, I'm looking at the thing, there's like 89 friends here tonight or something like that as of right now. So I feel like I have 89 new friends. And for me, I struggled a lot socially for a very long time. I still think that I do. And what my parents did is they were my best friends. They still are. And my mom always had this kind of be your own best friend mentality. So I was never bored. I was never kind of alone. Like even when I wasn't invited to things, my parents were the queens of diversion. My mom was the queen of diversion. So I wouldn't get invited to the birthday party. We would do something a lot cooler, like go out as a family or go out for ice cream or play games. We'd do something I'd rather do. And I didn't really think about the fact I was excluded or didn't have friends. But I think right now it's really difficult because we all want to be so connected to each other that it's really hard not to feel lonely or think that it's your fault because of autism, when really the thing is it's the fault of other people for not being understanding, not being accepting, and that they exclude us in ways they say they would never be mean to somebody with autism. That's something I've heard a lot of neurotypical and holistic people say, but they're mean in ways that they don't think they're being mean. They don't realize that they're being exclusionary, or they're laughing at somebody who acts differently, even though they never heard the word autism used to describe that person. So kind of a nuanced question and something I could probably think about all night long. But I love that you're an accepting parent.
I think we've got time for probably 2 more questions.
I can stay for more questions if you would like.
Have you ever felt imposter syndrome about whether you're autistic enough or anything like that?
That's a great question. The answer is yes. Because especially earlier on in my journey through advocacy, and especially as a young person, it seemed very divided into the functioning labels camp. So full disclosure, I'm not a fan of functioning labels. My original diagnosis had one. It was something that I clung to as a young person, not knowing the difference. And I realized that it meant that I never got kind of seen, I guess, the best way to describe this is that my challenges were always discounted because you're high functioning. So that was something I struggled a lot with too, is I would think, well, you would think when you had this label is that you're struggling, but you're not struggling the way other people are struggling. So I would have that, and especially from parents that would be like, you're not autistic like my kid. And when you're a young person, you think you're right. Maybe I'm just behind. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this. And as an adult, I realized you're right. I'm not autistic like them because I'm probably not a boy. Every person is different. And I'm also not the same as a 5-year-old as a 26-year-old grown woman. So I think how we come into our identity and that your autism is valid. And I think whether it's a formal diagnosis or you're suspecting or self-diagnosed, it's still valid. And that's your identity and your journey, that there's no being autistic enough. You are gloriously autistic, however you are.
I love that response, Haley. Thank you so much. One final question, I think, is what we're going to have time for. What strategies would you recommend for professionals working with autistic students to encourage self-advocacy and disability of pride among those students?
First off, self-advocacy starts at all ages and stages. So there are ways to teach self-advocacy, I think, that are appropriate for all ages. It's not just standing up for yourself at work or school. Sometimes it could be asking what a student wants to do for things like recess or an activity, or even when you're home asking what you want for dinner, and have that choice actually be honored. Because so many times when we're asked to make a decision, some adult or somebody else will override it, and you're taught this helplessness that your opinion doesn't matter because the adults are going to make the decisions for you anyway. So getting past that is a great way to help teach self-advocacy. In self-advocacy, so we talked a little bit about consent with parents. Self-advocacy can also just simply be saying no. No is one of the strongest words in the self-advocate's toolbox. And I think that's a really wonderful thing to be able to teach and encourage, is by honoring those choices and listening to our voices and uplifting them however possible. So whether someone is communicating verbally or whether someone is using AAC, whatever it might be, that we're respecting and listening to those voices. And that's a great place to start teaching self-advocacy. And also to listen to the people that we serve and ask, what do you want? Or what are you thinking? That there are so many little ways to encourage us as we get older too.
We've got so many questions. I think we're going to need to invite you back, Haley.
Maybe next time I could just have an informal, like, ask an autistic person type event.
I think that would be awesome. I promise this is the last question. Where can people go to connect with you after this event?
You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Haley Moss Art, HALEYMOSSART. You can also find me at haley@haleymoss.net, or you can also just visit me at haleymoss.net. I will stick all that in the chat as well for anyone who is a more visual human being.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again, Haley, so much for joining us tonight and providing some insight on how we can be stronger self-advocates, take pride in our disabilities and neurodiversity. It was just incredible to have you here with us. As we come to an end, I want to thank our participants for joining us too. I hope you'll join us for future webinars that we offer. And if you're interested in learning more about Access U or any of the programs offered by Starkloff, we invite you to visit our website at starkloff.org. That's STARKLOFF.org. Thank you to our viewers again for joining us. I hope you have a great evening, and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.